All right.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for taking the time today to have this interview.
Good afternoon, Ron. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, and how's things in sunny California, I guess?
It's fabulous. It's summer here, which means instead of being 65, 70 degrees during the winter, it's 75 to 85 degrees. So and the tourists are here. So they're all over Balboa Island. They're in the beaches. They're in the harbor. It's a great time. It's always a great time to be in Newport Beach.
Yeah, for sure. So some awesome news today, but I thought I'd first start maybe for viewers that have not or don't know you, give a bit of background about yourself and your management style.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, no, I started my first public company. I started investing in the stock market in 1978. I'm 62 years old, and then in 1985, I formed my first public company, which was a mining company at the time. I lived in Vancouver, went to mining school, worked in the mining industry, became the largest mineral concession holder in Baja California from 91 to 99, and took companies public myself starting in 1985. So I've been at it for 37 years. And in 2001, I pivoted into renewable energy. And that was the beginning of the hockey stick curve of renewables. So there was an early start with my partners back in 1980. And that's when the first wind farms were built in Tehachapi and Palm Springs from 80 to 86. And that industry died in 86 when Reagan got rid of the tax credits. There was a huge amount of tax credits available. That ended in 86. So the industry went from zero megawatts to 2,400 megawatts, and it stopped there, and it stayed at that number for another 16, 17 years. So when I got involved in 2000, 2001 with the original pioneers from 1980, there were still only 2,400 megawatts of installed wind energy, and that was 90% in California. So I started a little public company called Western Wind Energy. It became so on February the 18th, 2002. And with $250,000 in this little micro cap in Vancouver, I started to acquire prime pieces of land in the key areas in California and Arizona. And what I did was I chased the highest prices that you could possibly get. It's easier said than done because the high prices tend to have a lot of hair on the deals, a lot of environmental issues. Big companies that I competed with, multi-billion-dollar balance sheets, they wanted to deploy $7, $8, $9 billion at a time. They didn't want a project less than $2 billion. So when you push that kind of money through the system, you can only get an 8% yield because money is very competitive. And so they didn't have the patience to really work hard in the California market because projects took a long time. There were some big players, but they didn't want to put the time in to do that. They wanted to push their, $5 to $15 billion a year budget that they have to allocate on behalf of their infrastructure investors to give that sort of 8-9% return over really a 7 to 9% return over a 20-30 year period. It means their, either their insurance obligations or their long-term investor obligations. So working in California and working on projects that would take 5 to 10 years to get permitted was not something they didn't want to do, even though they knew what the outcome would be. Anyway, so that's what I specialized in. And 11 years later, we ended up building a series of wind farms in Arizona, California, brand new. The power prices that we were getting were 700% higher than the wholesale market in places like Texas. And because of that, we kicked out a lot of cash. So at the end of the day, we got bought out by Brookfield Asset Management, a subsidiary of Brookfield Asset Management, for $430 million cash in 2013, March 1st, 2013. So that kind of got me the gold ring. That was my intro into building big projects, it certainly wasn't a $5 billion project like some of the young people do with, with internet deals and app, software deals, but $400 million got me on the map, and it gave me the credentials and the expertise and the team that I knew what I was doing when it came to big infrastructure projects. So the National Post wrote a front page article on me in the front business section, and I can send it to you. And it basically highlighted the biggest people in the industry and what they thought my management style was. And basically, their viewpoint was I was a very efficient, a highly efficient leader in getting projects done, projects built. And I think you could break that down farther into what we call a servant. I call it a servant leader. So a servant leader is somebody who basically provides all the support and really does the work and the mentoring to everybody on the team. And so really, other than the first two, or the two main items of what my job is, the first item is, to really set the objective and to tell everybody which way the GPS is pointing. And then the finish is the celebration. Everything in between is really serving all the people on the team and helping them, empowering them in reaching their goals and their objectives of furthering their career and furthering their expertise. And so it's really a nurturing relationship. And you have to get involved. There's a bit of selection in my process. You've got to pick people that really want to run with the ball, that are, people that are self-starters, that like to work under pressure, that expect leadership from me. So they like the fact that I'm up at 5 in.the morning and I still give them emails at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm available virtually 24/7. And they see this sort of unrelentless, this relentless fight to do complex things to get it over the finish line. So I like to say that in my leadership style, it's not about going to cocktail parties and raising money. It's really about solving complex problems, is what the leadership style is at the end of the day. The more complex problems you solve, the more money you make for your shareholders. And it's not about me coming up with some big epiphany of what I think the next move is. You look at the input and you take the input from everybody. So this is a team effort, and the team effort, when you look at the outcome, any decision I make or any outcome I make has the DNA of everybody on the team. So there's just a lot of discussion, a lot of arguments, a lot of debate, and it's a very long process. And so it's a collaborative effort. It's an intense effort, and intensity is a big thing. So my wife says to me, after 11 years in Western Wind, or 10 years, she goes, and I moved down to California. I was kind of in a bit of a funk for a year. And she said, Jeff, she goes, that's because the company was your identity. And so when you work these companies, it is your identity. You put your heart and soul into it, and to the best of your ability, and you try to do as much as you can for your family. And luckily for me, I've got a great wife, and she's raised 4 beautiful kids. And we've been together for 30 years. Before that, I was married as well. So I got 7 kids in total. But I've had a great partner, and my partner allows me to put the intensity into these projects. So that's a bit of a long approach.
Yeah.
And I apologize, but I can state that my number one objective is the shareholders, is maximizing the value.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
And that's all I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, I was a shareholder in Western Wind, so I remember those days and did very well. So and once again, you put together a good portfolio of projects here in Greenbriar. You guys start off, how many shares do you own in the company yourself?
Well, yeah. So in Canada, I only have to personally report what I own myself. I don't have to report the family and all that. But I'm like, I 2 point in my own name, maybe 2.7, 2.6, 2.5. I haven't even looked. I haven't looked at my holdings in over a year. I file the insider reports, and whatever the total is a total. I think all family members, we're probably in the 6 to 7 million share range. And then we've got some big shareholders I would say, up to a dozen, very significant shareholders, very significant people in the industry, real estate, infrastructure, finance, that probably own another 10 to 15 million shares.
Okay, so it's pretty,
And
well
I've got a president that owns 1.8 million, 1.7. So collectively, there's probably 30, 40 people that own 70% of the company, 80%, and then the balance is divided with around 4,000 people. So I think effectively, the non-hardcore group is maybe 7 to 8 million shares.
Okay.
And that was reflected when we had that. If you remember, in May 28th of 2020, there was some what do you call them? An influencer on YouTube who did a 10-minute video of our company, and the stock had gone from $1.25 to $4.64 in 4 days, and it kind of stayed up in the $2.53 range. So that's very indicative of a company that's still, very well held by the shareholders, the key shareholders. And to be honest with you, the only reason it went down was the influencer had about 120,000 subscribers in YouTube, and they asked him a week later for advice, and he basically did not respond to any of his subscribers. So he put out an initial
one-shot deal.
Pardon me?
Kind of a one-shot deal.
Yeah, instead of giving everybody an update every 2 weeks on all the projects, he put a 10-minute video and ended it by saying, put 5% of your holdings in Greenbriar, and then he never talked to anybody again. And we never paid him. He was a guy that I never knew. He was a major YouTube influencer that had a following because he recommended Amazon and Netflix and all the major companies, and he really had no idea of what a small cap was. And of course, he was only 20 years old at the time. He was 20 years old at the time.
Right.
So he really did. And of course, English was a second language, so he didn't even speak the language. So so we learned a little bit about the influencer world. We took a position that we're not going to talk to anybody until we get the projects over the finish line. And as a result of that, Ron, we got the Sage Ranch final approval on August 17th, 2021, to build 995 homes. We got the commitment from Voya, provide $40 million bucks, and we actually got Montalva signed by the local government. And then the Fed, originally the Fed said yes, local said no, local said yes, Fed said no. So now we have the locals and the Feds. Now the locals saying yes and going over to the Fed. So we're in confidential discussions. I don't want to change subjects here, Ron, but we're in confidential discussion. And we believe, and our lawyers believe, that Montalva will get through the finish line much sooner than later. But unfortunately, can't say more than that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, so you answered that fairly enough. So hopefully sometime this year, possible.
Yeah, and again, what are the motives? The motives are President Biden, his energy secretary, committed $12 billion of fresh cash to the island for the infrastructure grid, and they will not release the money until they get all the solar projects from the past over the finish line. So the RFP, we argued that the RFP wasn't going to do any good because the 16 projects that got approved on May 28th, 2020, all those 16 projects, the prices were lower than the RFP, and we said that. We said that to both PREPA and the federal government. Of course, they didn't want to listen, but actually PREPA said it to the federal government, and they actually used an example. They said, "Hey, we made a bilateral agreement to buy oil, which Puerto Rico does. 2/3 of the island runs off of burning low-grade bunker oil to run steam boilers built in the 1950s to run turbines to produce electricity." And they made a bilateral agreement with Colombia and Venezuela to buy the oil. And the Feds came in and said, "No, you're not doing that. You're going to put it out to a public tender." And they said, if we do that, lo and behold, public tender came, and it was the same bidder at a higher price. So the Fed still never learned their lesson. So I think what happens is Puerto Rico has issues, but then when the federal government gets involved, it's even worse. The federal government in the United States is even worse. You know, the bureaucracy, the unintentional bureaucracy is 100 times more significant than the bureaucracy on the island. And so they don't know how to manage these processes. You know, it's like that old joke with the, I forget that comedy gang back in the 50s, who's on first, who's on second. That's the problem. But at the end of the day, we believe before the end of the year that we'll get the Montalva project approved. And as you know, there was a net present value report written by the associate professor of law of American University in Washington, D.C., who's the foremost valuator for power projects in Latin America. And the valuation of Montalva, even with the adjustments, is $191 million US net present value. So that is still a more significant asset than Sage Ranch. However, you know, Sage is up there. And of course, Sage now has a turn of fate, in the sense that there's many government agencies now that want to provide grant money to build homes at Sage Ranch. So people that are working below a certain threshold of income can actually get access to a rental, in which we get the money from the government for free, 90%, or we build and they buy the home and the government provides them a 1% mortgage. 1.9, it's subsidized down to 1. And by the way, it covers car payments if you lose your job. So there's a whole set of incentives that people in Canada are not aware of. And if people in Canada were aware, they would find that the United States as a whole is actually more of a socialized country than Canada. And I really mean that in a lot of ways when it comes to things like farming and fuel production, biofuels, renewable energy. The United States pays for 26% of a renewable energy project. Canada doesn't pay any of that. So there's a lot of things in the United States that are more opportunistic for people that want to build sustainable real estate, or they want to build renewable energy projects, than there is in Canada. You wouldn't think that intuitively, but that is the case. And that's why I moved here 9 years ago, and why when I started my Western Wind in 2002, I did all my work in the United States. It was just a better place to build projects than it was in Canada.
Yeah, I think a lot up here with some experience over many years would agree with you there. And at Sage Ranch, assuming this doesn't get bought out, it's been permitted and financing. When do you expect the first home sales could occur?
So we are, to get the home sale, you need what's called the yellow report. And to do that, you need the final drawings of everything. And that's not just the final drawings for the houses. That's the final drawings for the landscaping. So if you can imagine 995 homes, and you're talking the 100% drawings on all the landscaping. So the HOA, which we have to set up, we have to have the HOA budget down to the nearest penny. So is it $137.43 a month? Is it $172.28 a month? That has to be targeted specifically and then backed up with the actual drawings and a landscaping contracting company that says, this is the square footage I'm covering and this is what the cost is going to be, and then it gets certified. So that we are actually overdue. We are due now to have all the drawings completed and get and file what's called the precise development plan, and that is the detailed drawings for everything for phase 1. Once that thing is submitted and approved, we get the yellow slip, we can take deposits, and then we start off with the grading, the sewers, the water lines, dry electricals, roads, sidewalks, and then start constructing homes. So, you know, collecting money, I think we're a few months away. We do expect to collect deposits before the end of the year. The other issue is we have investors that, of course, want to buy the whole project, and investors that want to buy 100 units and prepay. and just simply own the whole project and then have rental income, for the next 30 years. So that's the biggest trend right now in the US is if infrastructure money cannot find enough wind energy projects, a toll highway. It's not easy getting a toll highway, as you know. It takes a lot of work to build a toll highway. So infrastructure money, pension money, long-term money that wants 7-8%, they can't get enough projects. So now they're converting into real estate. And to do that, they want to convert into projects that there's 1,000 units here, there's 500 units there. They buy the entire project and then they manage it as rental income. And their yield expectation is only 7 or 8%. And that's unlike, if we were talking to private investors, people want to borrow money, and then they want a 15-20% coupon, on their time and their effort and their energy. Well, that's not the case with large scale infrastructure money. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of people coming to our table wanting to buy either the whole project or buying pieces of the project and not building the houses, having us to build it. And because we have the relationship with the city, we have all the policies, all the procedures. They simply want to prepay. So that's the direction of where Sage Ranch is going. But to answer your question, either selling the whole project, selling pieces of the whole project, or taking deposits ourselves, that's going to unfold here in the next few months. And I expect it's going to play out for a while because when you get a government grant, let's say for $300 million, which is like 60%, not 90%, but 60% of a $480 million project, it's very hard to sell the project for 62 million US on an opening bid that was issued today when you're going to get 300 million from Uncle Sam. So I think you're going to see the beginning of a long process where there's a play on the asset as the project gets developed. So no different, Ron, than when we got the opening bid from Algonquin in October of 2011. We sold to Brookfield in March of 2013, but Algonquin in October of 2011 wanted to buy our company before the main projects were even finished. So I think you're going to see a multi-dimensional aspect to Greenbriar taking place here.
Okay, so there's been a lot of interest. This is probably just the beginning, I guess, with this offer. I was wondering how much did Greenbriar pay for Sage Ranch, and how much have you got into it at this point, roughly?
Yeah, so Sage Ranch is an interesting story. So the normal two items that would increase the value is not the main driver of the value increase. So we paid $1 million. We paid $1,040,000 in 2011. The main driver, your normal main driver is time. Okay, so this is a project that was put together by previous developers in the year 2000 and before, and it's got its entitlement for 688 homes in 2006. A month later, the market crashed, and so the entitlement was granted. But if you don't build within 2 years, you don't move dirt within 2 years, you lose your entitlement. So the market crashed, as you know, there was the worst real estate crash in U.S. history. So entitlement was lost. The second item of appreciation is density. So we went from 688 units to 995. And that would be another major event. Those are significant. Getting 300 more homes is obviously a major value increase. Owning something that really was created 20 years ago is another major increase. Despite those two things, the third item is still the most profound item, and that's the political value. And the political value is, when I first came to that area in 1988, I was working in the mining business. I sold some projects to a company called Glamis Gold. If you remember Glamis back in the day,
yeah,
it was a major success story that went from pennies to I think $50 a share. It was a $9 billion sale to I think to Gold Corp. I don't know how, a decade ago now, 12 years ago. Anyway, So Glamis was sold, and they had a big project about 30 miles away from Tehachapi, and I acquired land over there, and I put those packages together. So I was very familiar, Ron, in 1988 of what the whole region looked like. So the whole region, Tehachapi, but where the population center was to feed Tehachapi, specifically the Antelope Valley, which comprises Lancaster and Palmdale, that area, which is now over 500,000 people, and then of course Greater Bakersfield is over 500,000 people. If you would have went to Lancaster, Palmdale in 1988, you would have saw a guy like me, 62 years old, who was a World War II veteran, who had a RV, brand new RV for 40 grand. He had a brand new house for 99,000. He was living off his military pension because he spent, the last 25 years in the Air Force in that area, and living life happily. And it was a very well structured area, beautiful place. That generation died, and for the most part, and 15 years later, that area turned into a very big challenge, lifestyle wise, and it became very gang infested. There's no denial to that. And so 20 years after 1988, the year 2008, when the market crash came of 06, and the guys that put together the limited partnerships, not the people buying the land, but the people buying the financial interest in the partnership, they spent around 21 million bucks, spent a few million on all the engineering and design. But the reason they did the partnership was because they were going to sell 688 lots to KB Homes, at $60,000, $70,000 a lot as a paper lot. So they were looking to double their money. When 06 came and the market crashed, everybody walked away from real estate. So that project, that special purpose vehicle that had all those investors, they basically lost their money. They walked away, and so went back to the original property owner, a company called Tower Investments. So they had another name for one of their subsidiaries that held the asset, and so they put the property for sale. They were asking originally 20, and then people would go to the city and say, look, you've approved 688 lots. I want to put an option on this property. Will you support our application to build 680 homes? And the city said no. And the reason the city said no is because people started asking that question in 2008, which was 20 years after the demographic change of me, a guy like me who's now 82 that no longer lives there. That area had became a very challenging area to live in, and the city of Tehachapi did not want the quality of life to change, and for Tehachapi to be nothing more than an exurb of Los Angeles, which of course it is. And so it just simply said no. So that project became an unsaleable project. They couldn't sell it. And so in 2011, 5 years after the market crash, I talked to Tower. They originally wanted $5 million. I offered them $1,040,000 and didn't even talk to the city. And they sold the project to me. The city called me in their office and they said, "What the hell did you buy the project for?" And I said, "Well, I don't understand. No city government ever talks to somebody about buying land." And it became very clear they were unsure of what I was going to do with the property. They were worried, and they were sincerely worried because, as you can live in an area that has a lifestyle based on residential, and then all of a sudden somebody makes commercial zoning, or and then you have traffic goes up by 900%, and the quality of life deteriorates. So they didn't want that to happen. I bought the property and I held on to it for 7 years in Greenbriar. I could have bought it myself. I put it into Greenbriar. That's my loyalty to the shareholders. In 2018, I approached the city. The city now knew that all the massive defense contracts were issued with SpaceX, with the U.S. Air Force, the B-21 bomber at Northrop, and between 20 to 40 miles away, that there was tens of thousands of people that did not want to live in Lancaster, Palmdale, didn't want to drive 2 hours south to Santa Clarita, 55 miles south, 2 hours in rush hour, to live in a $1.2 million home and then do 2 hours each way to work in the aviation industry, where all the facilities are between 20 to 40 miles away from Sage Ranch. They wanted to live in Sage Ranch, and the military contacted the city and made the city manager the honorary commandant of Edwards Air Force Base. So the city manager now was acutely aware that the people that really wanted to move in there were military people, and they didn't want the military people didn't want commercial or industrial. They wanted residences, and the city was happy with that. So we started the process. We spent another, I don't know, $4, $5, $6 million bucks, and we got it to the finish line. And of course, as you know, August 17th, 2021, my 61st birthday, is when we got the project fully entitled. So that's the history, and it's that third item of politics that's given us this increase in value, that there's not one project in the United States that will come close to being a $1 million investment to be turning into a $500 million project. There's not one. And now we're not out here to flag that horn. We're simply here to flag the horn for our shareholders, because you can't walk around communities and go, hey, we're the best developer around. We buy properties for $1 million and we turn them into $500 million 11 years later. That sounds like a little bit of bravado, but for the sake of the shareholders, it's essential that the shareholders know how lucky they are and how lucky we all are, and how hard we work together as a team to get this project over the finish line.
Oh, that's great. I see I just got less than a minute here now in this recording, so just want to say thanks for your time and some very good info.
No problem, Ron. Let's try to, if we can, for the shareholders, if we can do this every month to give updates, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea.
We can do site visits. We can bring the videos along. I can give them tours of Montalva, Sage Ranch, tours of Alberta, the projects there. Everything else is under confidentiality. I can't say much more than today's news release.